Hello and welcome to episode 8 of Leadership Conversations with Krishna. And today I'm pleased to have my guest, Eduardo Peñalver. To those based in Seattle and associated with Seattle University, he's a man who needs no introduction. But for those in other parts of the US and my audience across the globe, I will take a minute to introduce him. Professor Eduardo M. Peñalver became the president of Seattle University on July 1st, 2021. From 2014 until 2021, he served as the Dean of Cornell Law School. Professor Peñalver received his BA from Cornell University and his JD from Yale Law School. Between college and law school, he studied philosophy and theology as a Rhodes Scholar at Oriel College, Oxford. Upon completing law school, he clerked for Judge Guido Calabresi of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit and at the Supreme Court for Justice John Paul Stephens. Professor Peñalver previously served as the John P. Wilson Professor of Law at the University of Chicago Law School between 2012 to 2014 and taught at Cornell Law School between 2006 and 2012 and at Fordham Law School between 2003 to 2006. He has also been a visiting professor at Harvard Law School and Yale Law School. Welcome, Eduardo.
Thank you.
So the way I like to start it is, just understand the leadership journey. So can you talk us through your leadership journey? How did you get into leadership, and was it something you always aspired to go into?
No, I would say my whole career journey has been very nonlinear, and so um, I not only did I not intend to become a university leader, but I never intended to become a law professor. I went to law school. Well, actually, I'll go back even further. I started college. I intended to be a doctor, and then I during the course of my studies as an undergraduate, transitioned my plans towards law school, but then fully intending to be a practicing lawyer, uh, which I did initially after finishing my clerkships, and then it was really kind of a fortuitous conversation with a man who had just become dean at Yale Law School, Harold Coe, at a time when I was going to leave my law firm and I was looking for other uh, jobs. I was kind of looking for maybe a job in government or maybe a different firm, and I had a conversation with Dean Coe that led me into the legal academy, but then I wanted to be a law professor, and so I was a law professor for um, I guess it was about 10 years before I became a dean, and 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 so the journey has been a matter of kind of responding to the environment I'm in, and thinking about how I can have the most impact and find um, the ways that I can contribute to the different communities I've been a part of, and that's sort of led me into wanting to be a dean and try to have an impact on my law school, and I've enjoyed that work, and so that led me to then seek out the opportunity to be president of a university.
That's a fascinating journey, right? And I kind of like the part where you said you kind of adjusted according to the environment that you were in. And now that brings me to my next question is, as becoming a leader, were there any skills that you naturally had, or and what are the skills that you actually had to learn on the go or develop over a period of time?
Oh, probably, so many that I've had to learn on the go. I'm not sure what I would say are the natural aptitudes I brought. I would say one thing that I brought, to my work as a dean, as a pretty inexperienced dean. I when I became the dean of Cornell Law School, I had not really had an administrative um, position with any kind of budget responsibility or supervisory role prior to that, so that was all new to me. Um, I think what I brought to that work though was I would say three things that were helpful in being able to do the work to pick up the skills that I needed that I lacked. Um, One was curiosity and a sort of healthy sense of eagerness to learn and to do the work to learn the things that I needed to learn. And the second was a commitment to service and a motivation uh, to a service approach to the work that I think uh, was helpful in giving me the right orientation, kind of both with respect to myself and others, to be able to um, do that learning. And then, I think the third thing that I brought to it was, uh, a good set of problem solving skills that I think comes out of my legal training, or maybe is part of what drew me to law school. But I would, when people ask me what the quintessential lawyer skill is, I always start with problem solving. And and I don't mean that in the sense of solving everyone's problems, but in the sense of being able to break down a complex challenge and find good viable paths forward to make progress. So those three things really were helpful in making it possible for me to acquire the many, many, many skills that I needed to be able to succeed as a dean. And then I was just reflecting on this the other day, because I felt like an experienced leader after 7 years of serving as a law school dean. But then when I got to Seattle University, I found I was almost back in the same position all over again, having to really um, do a lot of learning on the job, and those same skills have kind of been equally helpful in this role.
No, it's great you mentioned those values, right? Service, curiosity, and you also touched upon your Seattle U and how you felt like you needed to restart. Now that brings me to my next question, right? And I know you took over Seattle U at a difficult period. This was July 2021 when we were still in the midst of COVID, and a lot of changes across just life in general and also universities because of COVID, right? How challenging a time was it then, to take over, and how has these last few years been for you in terms of managing those challenges?
Well, it was a challenging time to come in as a new president, especially as someone who was not already part of the community, because I had to get to know people, and for a good part of that time, there were not a lot of people around. And so just getting to know people was challenging because it's very hard to get to know people uh, on Zoom, for two reasons. One, you have to know them enough to be able to schedule the meeting. You don't just bump into people on Zoom. And then also, even once you've scheduled the meeting, I think if your first interaction with someone is on Zoom, you get a distorted perception of them. It's a really not a great medium for um, getting a sense of a person, or the whole person, I would say. So when I was selected, it was really in the thick of COVID. It was October of uh, 2020, and and then as I was preparing to start the job, it was the spring of 21, and things were still very closed down. The vaccine had not been developed yet, and even after the vaccine, things were still fairly closed down, and certainly people's comfort level was not high, with being out, in groups and things like that until really well into the fall. So it did make that transition harder. It made it harder to get to know the community. You couldn't really tell, as you're coming into a community, what is truly the community and what is a result of COVID. Um, and that made it challenging to diagnose things in terms of where we needed to head as a university. Um, uh, in the time since, I wouldn't say it's gotten easier. I mean, there are obviously there were challenges. It was harder coming out of COVID, I think, than it was going into COVID. I mean, it's easy to shut everything down and go online. That's a kind of a binary choice. But then trying to get people back has been challenging. And especially in that first year, there was a lot of heightened emotion around getting back into the classroom, getting back in public. There were a lot of people who were slow to reacclimate to that. And a lot of uncertainty about how effective the vaccines were and, would keep masking or stop masking. There was a lot of complexity around those questions. And then there have just been echoes of COVID, for the last few years. My first year as president, or I should say, really my second full academic year, but the first cohort of students that came through, the first year students during my first year as president, we saw a spike in attrition with that group, and that was something that universities saw across the country. Just a much higher attrition rate first to second year among that cohort than we had seen previously. And I attribute that to COVID and the impact of COVID on people's readiness for college. And that created all kinds of organizational challenges. And then, we've seen challenges on the, with readiness generally. Especially in math and science courses, based on experiences people had while they were in high school. So it continues to linger, the effects of COVID, and we are, I think, gradually getting back towards something that's more normal. But then, there are all kinds of other external shocks too. So it hasn't felt like it's gotten easier. It hasn't all been due to COVID, but I think a big chunk of it was kind of slowness in coming back from COVID. There have been other misfires. The federal government's very troubled rollout of the new FAFSA form last year, and now all the everything going on with higher ed and research funding and the Department of Education and financial aid, like that's all having an impact as well. So it's been each year has come with its own set of challenges.
Yes, yeah, absolutely right. And just taking you back to the first year, and you mentioned COVID, and then trying to acclimatize to a newer environment, a newer community, right? And obviously, COVID didn't make it easy. So, as a leader, how did you make those decisions during those 1 year? Because you were trying to get to know, people. Did you rely on your immediate team? How did you go about, your everyday leadership and decision making? I would say.
So it's a combination of things. I would say I relied heavily on the people who had been at Seattle University and helped me understand what I was seeing. I had to, but I couldn't wait, for myself, to get fully up to speed in order to make, we had to make decisions in real time, and I had to kind of consult my own kind of inner compass on some of those decisions, and based on my experiences as a law school dean and as a professor, um, chart a path forward that I thought was the right one. Um, but I tried to listen carefully to what people were telling me about the Seattle University community and what it needed. And so it's a little bit of a triangulation between those two things. And it as time has gone by and I've kind of gotten more familiar with the community, more confident in my own understanding of the dynamics of the community, I think I've been able to trust my own instincts more. But certainly in that first year, I did have to consult a lot and listen carefully, and it maybe led to a little bit of caution in terms of the pace of change that I thought that the university could accommodate.
That brings me to my next question, right? You talked about challenges, and challenges are something that are always on your plate, right? And sometimes more, sometimes less, but it's always there and about. Now, how is it like as a leader, right? Because the people say that it's lonely at the top. Leadership is lonely. How do you see that? And as a leader, how important is it to also take those breaks and have time with your family, right? How do you see those two aspects?
Uh, I think it's true that leadership is lonely in the sense that your ability to um, consult with or commiserate with people is limited by the need to make decisions and keep confidences. And the way I navigate that is by trying to find peer groups that I can engage with. So when I was a dean, that included the deans of the other colleges at my university. I couldn't, you know, always let my hair down, with faculty at the law school, but I could talk to my colleague deans across campus. And even though they were based in different disciplines, there were common experiences, right, as the leader of an academic community that we could all relate to across those um, disciplinary differences. It's harder, at the university level as a president because my colleagues are not necessarily on campus. But I do have people that I can talk to who are presidents at other universities or leaders at other institutions. I have monthly, uh, sorry, no, it's more like a quarterly breakfast with the CEO of another nonprofit in Seattle, and we get together and talk. And she's leading a medical organization, and I'm leading a university, so they're very different in terms of the business models and the challenges, but there are some common elements. Just any kind of leadership of a nonprofit at a significant scale, you find similar kinds of behaviors and challenges that arise, and so we can compare notes and certainly sympathize with some of the things that we're experiencing. And then I have my family, and my family is, I try not to bring my work home too much, especially with my kids, um, but my wife is someone that I can talk to about almost anything, and there are things that I can't share with her about work, but certainly the things that aren't confidential we can talk about, and she's able to give me good advice because she knows me well and kind of is not afraid to be honest with me when I just thinks I'm going down the wrong path. So I find that's a real consolation. But I think it's true that leadership is lonely, and can be isolating, and you have to be very thoughtful about finding ways to, find people that you can turn to for advice and also just turn to for emotional support.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing, right? And it's so important to have that peer group and also family, right? And in your case, it also, I think, helps that your wife is also in the kind of a similar ecosystem of the university, right? So able to relate to it a lot better, I would say. So jumping, to kind of the next phase of the podcast, I wanted to touch upon a little bit about universities and their connection to the business world a little bit, right? And AI is kind of the talk of the town now. Everybody's talking about AI now. Obviously, universities is a big partner in the whole ecosystem of AI, right? Educating students and also kind of providing that thought leadership. Now, how do you see universities' role, maybe 5 to 10 years from now? What influence do you hope that universities would have in the whole AI value chain when you look back, let's say 5 to 10 years, or even currently, what role do you think universities can play, in the AI value chain?
Well, AI is interesting because so much of it is not being developed at universities, so that's unusual for an emergent technology. If you look at the big technological innovations of the 20th century, most of them were kind of pioneered at universities, or refined at universities, and AI is really being created in a more corporate environment, outside of the university, although there are people who have a kind of foot planted in each of those worlds. Um, but I do think that universities will have a role in um, developing some of the use cases for AI and evaluating those. There's a lot of work to be done understanding how AI works and what its strengths are and what its limitations are. And I think, bringing some academic rigor to that's not obscured by profit motive will be important. And so I would imagine research around AI, if not the kind of first order research in terms of the creation of new models, but research around its capabilities and uses, I think, and potential shortcomings will be significant and will be something that universities are well equipped to do. Um, and then, universities, the thing about AI is that it really needs human collaboration, right? It's not autonomous in any sense. It's responsive to human prompting and human manipulation, and so you know, the my sense of it, and I don't think anyone really has a really clear vision of where this is going at this point, but my sense of it is that AI is most useful in the hands of someone with some pre-existing skill. Um, that it requires and benefits from and is a benefit to a knowledgeable user. And so universities, in addition to kind of helping to understand what AI can do, will be really instrumental in producing the kinds of people who can get the most out of AI, in different settings. And I think it's going to really depend on that first body of work to understand what that means in different contexts. What does it mean to use AI effectively in a coding context or in a computer science context versus in a legal context versus in a medical context, versus some other kind of business context. And so kind of helping understand the capabilities, the limitations, and then helping to prepare people to make the most of that, I think are all things that universities are going to contribute to the proliferation of AI. Uh, but I'm not. I think I don't have a special insight into where this is all heading, and I'm skeptical of people who claim to because the technology is moving very fast, and uh, the I don't think that the use cases have been clearly established. And there's a lot of hype because there's a lot of profit motive at work here in what's released and how it's described and how its capabilities are are portrayed. And so there's quite a bit of noise around the signal, and so I think it there there's an it's important to have a healthy skepticism, but not maybe not you know um, but not a unrealistic either skepticism or optimism about this technology. I think we need to try to maintain some objectivity in assessing it. I mean, it's clearly amazingly capable in at certain things, and then it obviously has some really glaring limitations that I see every time I use it. Rooted in the architecture of the technology. Um, but there's just a lot of hype and a lot of noise that I think we need to be careful about how we navigate.
Yeah, totally agree with you there, right? And as somebody who's currently in the tech ecosystem, right, and also attending a few AI conferences across the globe, I agree. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of figuring out. People are still figuring out, and there's also a little bit of FOMO, if I would call it, right. So everybody wants to be kind of associated with AI. Fear of missing out is there, but yeah, we'll see how it kind of evolves over a period of time. Um, you know, just moving on to the next subject, right? And for American universities. International partnerships are really important, right? How do you see Seattle U developing those international partnerships? And also, can you talk a little bit about the Round Glass India Center and what prompted kind of starting it, and how do you see that playing a role, in the India-US partnership, if you'd say so, right? People to people, academic, a bit of economic too.
Sure. Well, Seattle is a global city, in so many different ways. At the most basic level, it's a port city and is a hub of global trade, especially between Asia and the United States, or Asia and North America. Um, but it's always been, to some extent, global just because of that. It's a beautiful port, and there's always been a lot of movement in and out of Seattle because of that, and necessitates a sort of global perspective and sensitivity. Uh, but then it's also a hub of technology and innovation, um, and the companies that have been founded in Seattle are global brands like Amazon and Boeing and Costco and Microsoft and so many others, Packard, and those companies bring in talent from around the world, and bring in people who are aspiring to either join those companies or to start their own companies. Um, and so, as a university based in Seattle, we have to have a global perspective, and be able to attract and serve people from around the world who want to be in Seattle, and want to engage with that really distinctive culture and set of institutions. One of the fastest growing communities in our region is the Indian American community, or the Indian, really Indian origin community that has grown up, especially on the east side of Lake Washington. Uh, I'd say in the earliest members of that community were drawn by uh, Microsoft and the tech industry, but it's much broader than that. And it honestly was broader than that even before Microsoft. But that's really led to an explosion of um, the scale of the Indian community in the Pacific Northwest, and it kind of revolves around Microsoft and Amazon and the tech industry, but also medical and life science research. And it's sort of self-sustaining, right? I mean, Indian uh, Indian culture places a high premium on family and extended family, and so when I talk to students who come to study at Seattle University from India, many of them will say, "Well, I came here because I have a cousin, it could be a quite distant cousin, but who works at Amazon, and it's important to me to be near family, and so this was the region that I looked to when I wanted to study in the United States, and that you can kind of multiply that story many, many times over, and it becomes an engine that feeds in migration from India to the Pacific Northwest. Uh, but there hasn't historically been a strong connection between the region and India at the institutional level. The Seattle business community has historically been more focused on East Asia, especially, but more recently China, but also Japan, Southeast Asia. Um, but India, when you look at a map, right, it's not uh, proximate to Seattle in that way. And so trade hasn't really driven the relationship between Seattle and India. It's been the tech industry and that migration pattern. And so we saw a gap in terms of the institutions in Seattle, um, both for the study of and the engagement with India and the Indian community in the United States. And we reached out to Sunny Singh, who's a local tech entrepreneur from India, and he very generously, through his Round Glass Foundation, funded the creation of the Round Glass India Center at Seattle University, which focuses on um, academic, um, cultural, and kind of non-governmental engagement between Seattle broadly and India broadly, and between Seattle and institutions in Seattle and the Indian community in Seattle. So it's focused on bringing speakers to campus from in Indian government, Indian politics, Indian culture, civil society, academia, and creating those opportunities for engagement for the Seattle University community, but also for the Indian and Indian American community in the Seattle area.
Yeah, yeah, and that's it's been a great initiative, right? And also you touched upon the historical aspect of Seattle also being a port and trading city, and how that has kind of evolved into also the tech industry and migration in general, right? Moving to the last part of our podcast, right? And there are a couple of questions that I like asking each of my guests. Let's say you were in your 20s today. Which industry or domain would you be interested, to start a new business or pursue a career in?
Ooh. Uh, well, it's I'm kind of living vicariously through my kids on this. I think looking ahead, um, I would very much be focused on healthcare and um, industries and professions that relate to wellness and aging, because globally and in the United States, the population is growing older. People are having fewer kids, but people are living longer. And and so we're going to see, I think, increasing interest in and demand for services that are responsive to an aging population. And I also think that those industries, right, and those services are resilient to automation. Obviously AI is going to have a huge impact on healthcare, and it already is having an impact on healthcare and um, in different ways, in research, in clinical settings. Um, but I think that there's a continued need for that kind of human touch and relational um, aspects of those, especially on the clinical side, but not just on the clinical side of those professions. And so I think those professions are going to be impacted by AI, but are going to be resilient to replacement by automation and AI. And will benefit from innovation and research that technology will facilitate. So I think that's going to be an exciting area, but an area that's in need of continued growth and development. So I think that includes medicine and nursing and life sciences research. Those are all areas that if I were in my 20s, I'd be looking to as or future areas of innovation and growth.
Yeah, that's a fascinating answer, right? And you know, I asked a similar question to people in the similar age and experience group as yours, and one or two of them also said healthcare, right? And I think it shows, and some of them also said education. I think it
Mhm.
shows the importance. And coming to the final question, and this is a question is kind of like a signature question, if I would say so. So, what does leadership mean to Edward?
Leadership means service. I mean, leadership. When I became a dean, I I reached out to the judge I clerked for, Guido Calabresi, who had been the dean of Yale Law School before he was appointed to the Second Circuit. And was very successful in that role, and just someone who's wise and brilliant. And I just asked him for advice as I was getting ready to take on a new job that I felt, not super prepared for. And he gave me the metaphor of the butler. He said the dean is like a butler. Um, and he said it, he said that I don't mean that in a with a kind of false modesty, because the butler is an important person in a household. Um, they have a lot of power and authority, but they exist and work to serve the household. And and that's what the dean is there to do, is there to serve the students and the faculty and the staff, to make life less frustrating and more productive for people. And I think that's the essence of any leadership role, is to serve the community you're leading, to help it thrive. And that it involves the exercise of authority and decision making, but always with an eye towards how to make that community more resilient and function more effectively, and serve the interests of those community members more effortlessly. But it requires a constant attention to others, and I always think of it as a role that involves a lot of sublimation of your own desires and preferences, as you try to figure out how to help the community move forward. But and there are lots of different ways to be a leader and a lot of different styles of leadership. But for me, really effective leaders, no matter what their style is, right, have to start from a standpoint of service.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for that detailed answer, right? And leadership is essentially all about service, and I think you captured that really well. With that, thank you so much for your time today, and sharing your insights on leadership in general and the role that American universities and Seattle U specifically has with the broader business community, right? Thank you so much again for your time today.
Thanks, Krishna. It's great to talk with you.